Greetings, my wonderful students. Today we discuss the response of European countries to the crises of wars and religion and other issues. Absolutism. Now, this particular picture in front of you is the cover to the book called Leviathan, written by Thomas Hobbes. The Leviathan, as you can see, pictures a king. You can see the crown and the sword and the scepter over the town, and the king is huge. He's like a giant. What you might not notice is his body is made up of the people. The idea is that the king alone represents and speaks for all the people. He is this giant, magnificent creation, the Leviathan. Absolutism. The kings of Europe began to gain more power in their kingdoms and exert more control. This is called absolutism, as the kings had absolute or total power. The epitome or perfect example of absolutism was Louis XIV, pictured here, of France, from 1638 to 1715. Again, these kings are gaining total power, and they believe their right to rule came from God, the divine right of kings. And this was used to justify absolutism. So, if God chose the kings to rule, then to disobey the king was to disobey God. And this is similar to the Chinese mandate of heaven. So, that's how they used to justify their rule, and that they could basically do whatever they wanted. The Sun King. Now, Louis XIV built a huge palace at Versailles and forced his nobles to live there with him. Here is an image of one of the rooms of the palace of the Sun King, the Palace of Versailles. By keeping the nobles close to him, he could make sure they weren't going to rebel. They spent pretty much all of their time in gossip wars and parties against each other and trying to get the king to help them in that, instead of rebelling against the king as he took away more and more of their power. Other monarchs tried to emulate or copy Louis XIV. They wanted to be like him. War and debt. Now, Louis XIV had wanted to expand French territory, and he fought many wars to do so, as you can see here in this map. Louis's wars drained the French treasury, the amount of money they had saved up, and they were deeply in debt by the end of his reign. This debt would eventually help lead to the French Revolution in the 1700s. So it takes a while, but it does catch up with the French in the end. Peter the Great of Russia, 1682 to 1725. He was the Tsar, or like Caesar, of Russia. He wanted warm water ports for Russia, and the Ottoman Empire had them. Now, warm water ports are ports that do not freeze over in the winter. Recognizing that Russia is very far north, it has its border, its northern border around the Arctic Circle. If they're going to trade year-round through water ports, which of course is the main method of trading, they're going to need access to ports that don't freeze in the middle of winter, that their boats are not going to sink in. So, Ottoman Empire has warm water ports in the Black Sea, which can then be used to sail into the Mediterranean Sea through the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. He wants them. Russia wants them. So in order to beat the Ottomans in war, however, Peter wanted to modernize Russia. So he built the city of St. Petersburg, his window on the west, modeled off of Western cities. He forced the Russian nobles to cut their beards to make them look more European. And he even traveled in secret. It was kind of an open secret. Everybody knew who he was. But he traveled to places like France and the different Germanies, the different areas of the Holy Roman Empire. And he studied what methods of technology they were using in combat and their wars. And he came back and he basically modernized the Russian army. He encouraged manufacturing and trade in Russia as well. It's one of the reasons why he's called Peter the Great. He encouraged Russia to expand. Catherine the Great, 1729 to 1762. She actually gained warm water ports for Russia, again continuing that process. And she increased the power of the Tsar. And she continued the westernization of Russia, turning Russia into a great power of Europe. And she also supported the continued expansion of Russia. Thomas Hobbes, as I stated, believed that people needed a strong government to keep order. In his book Leviathan, Hobbes stated that the people make a social contract, think like a deal, to give absolute power to the king, and in exchange the king keeps law and order, prevents chaos. And so, according to Hobbes, the only way to have this order is to give the king absolute power. And he believes that people are born with certain rights, but you give up those rights in order to have safety and security. That's the idea of the Leviathan. Now, John Locke stated in his writings, the two treatises on government, that people had natural rights, and that the people create a contract or a deal with the government to protect the rights of the people. And if the government fails to protect the rights of the people could then remove or change that government. So Hobbes and Locke both agree with the idea that the power to rule comes from the people, and that the government is there to protect the people. But for Hobbes, it's just to keep order. But for John Locke, it's to keep order and protect the rights of the people. According to Hobbes, if the government's violating your rights, you kind of just have to deal with that. And according to Locke, if the government's violating your rights, then the people have a right to revolt, to rebel against their government. Locke's ideas went against the concept of absolutism and the divine right of kings. Locke supported Parliament in their glorious revolution against the king. And his ideas would greatly influence the American Revolution and the French Revolution of the late 1700s. And that is their response to absolutism.